the NSLS-II show.
With our host, Matt Whitaker, and our co-host, Esther Klein. Special guests today include Paul Northrop, Carla Losh, Ann Olds, and Eric Johnson, with special guest appearance by John Young. Now, here's Matt.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome to the latest edition of the NSLS-II UEC show. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today. At this time, I'd like to take a quick moment to introduce our co-host this time, Esther Klein.
Hi, everyone.
It's great to have you here with us. So now, Esther, before we usually talk to any of the guests, we always want to have some sort of humanizing element that we talk about a little bit, just to break the ice and let people know a little bit about you. So now I understand, the last year and a half has been really weird, and there have been a lot of people who have gotten things like quarantine puppies, but I understand that you went a slightly different route. Is that right?
Yeah, I actually got 4 chickens, 4 hens, and then they lay eggs every day. So I've been very happy about them. And it's been very interesting to observe their behavior as well. They teach us human what not to do because they're very big on segregation. I have 4 chickens, 2 of one color, 2 of the other kind, and they don't play together. They don't, lay in the same nest and all that. And they're also bullies. And one of them at some point got wounded, and chickens are cannibals in case you don't know. So anytime one of them get wounded, the rest would jump on her and try to eat her alive. And also her name is Daisy. She's the one who's been bullied. I will not name the other bullies. So in the end, I had to separate Daisy, and then so she's happy now. She's laying eggs and all that. So yeah, it's been very interesting.
Oh, that's really cool. So in addition, when you're not spending time as the mother to a bunch of chickens, what is it that you do at the NSLS-II?
Yeah, so I've been at CFN for 3 years. I'm a staff scientist here, and I'm also heavily involved in the partner user program between CFN and LightSource2, specifically with the scattering beeline, CMS, and SMI. So I'm really happy to be on UEC both as a user and as a staff scientist.
That's very cool. So I want to give everybody a little bit of a breakdown about how the show is going to be run today. So it's great to have you here with us as the co-host. And we've got some guests, as was mentioned at the very beginning of the show, that are going to join us today to talk a little bit about life at the NSLS-II and what's going on around there. So I just wanted to let everybody in the audience know that you can submit your questions through the Q&A function in the Zoom chat there, or you can also send an email at any time to NSLS2UEC@bnl.gov, and we'll do our best to get to answer all of the questions during the show. And at this time, if you have any technical considerations that you need, please address those in the moderator chat. I would like to now turn things over and bring on our first guest, if that's all right. And at this time, I would like to introduce Paul Northrop. He is a research professor in the Geosciences Department at Stony Brook, where I'm from. And he's a partner user beamline scientist at the TES beamline, which he designed and built. And he is now the new chair for the Users Executive Committee. Paul, welcome.
Hello. It's a privilege to represent this user community. So glad to be here.
Very cool. Yeah, it's definitely great to have you here too. Now, to humanize you just a little bit, you grew up pretty close to the area, but not in what you might consider a typical Long Island setting. This is more of a kind of a small farming and fishing village. Is that right?
Yes. So it's the town of Eastport. It's on the South Shore, not quite to the Hamptons. The key point being not quite to the Hamptons. And it is really a very small village. It's changed a lot in the last 20 years, so it's not at all like it used to be. But at the time, it was a place where everybody knew everybody else. The school was K through 12 in one building, and it had a really great sense of community.
That's very cool. I remember having culture shock when I moved to Long Island from Kingston, where the university has more people at it than the city that I grew up in. So it's definitely a little bit different. Especially, it's got to be amazing having that kind of a setting in the middle of Long Island. So,
and at the time, there was also a lot of the farming was duck farming. So the entire shore was not waterfront condos and homes, but it was duck farms,
Nice.
which is quite different.
Right. So now you, thankfully not me anymore, just now it's you. You are the chair of the Users Executive Committee for the NSLS-II. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of a platform for a minute to talk a little bit about what it is, what it does, and your prospects as chair this year.
Well, the UEC represents all of the NSLS-II users, particularly in interactions with NSLS-II management and with the Department of Energy. So we serve a very important role in speaking to and advising both of those entities with respect to user needs. So I hope to represent the community very well, and I hope to serve you in this capacity. The chair also has served 1 year as vice chair, and as vice chair organizes the annual users meeting. And so this year's vice chair is Dave Sprouster, who will be organizing the users meeting. And then next year he'll become chair.
Sucker.
So what do you see as the major issues for UEC or for the users?
Well, besides getting through this current COVID situation, I think the biggest issues facing the user population are user access and productivity, particularly catching up on the backlog of proposals and science that the current situation has developed. So we need to get back into productive use of the facility and catch up on our science.
So one of the things that's been pretty universally true during this whole process is that the Beamline staff have been an absolutely amazing help during the pandemic. Before as well, obviously, but specifically during the pandemic when we're in predominantly remote and mail-in operation mode. So is there something that you can recommend that we as users or that we as the UEC can do to help them out?
Well, we continue to express our extreme appreciation for all the work and way above and beyond the Call of Duty effort that the Beamline staff have put in to help us to get what we have been able to do so far. And so we are pushing both the facility and DOE to get them some help to relieve some of that pressure. So getting them more help is the most important thing. But also we're looking for ways to show our appreciation in a tangible fashion. So if anyone has any ideas, we welcome those ideas as well.
And so do you think things will ever get back to normal? And, if yes, how do we transition? And if not, how do you recommend users or staff to accommodate the new normal?
Right. So I think the question is more about what the new normal will be. That has yet to be determined. I think that we've learned a lot over the past year. We've found some things that work and some things that don't work. And so we're trying to emphasize the things that do work. The mail-in and remote operations are something that's a good improvement. And we need to work on things like live interactions, because that's what's missing from the current scheme of things. And so we want to restore the things that are essential and still retain the advances and good things that we've developed over the past year.
Right. That's definitely the hardest line to walk, I think, as we move forward. So, well, I'm not going to keep you here for too much longer. I know that you're a busy individual, particularly today. If there are any more questions that do come in for you, though, we will be certain to hold on to them. And again, I would remind everyone again about the email address, NSLS2UEC@bnl.gov. I'm sure Paul would say the same thing, but we're definitely here for you, and we're here to answer any questions you might have.
Absolutely.
All right. So thank you so much for joining us today. And we will see you, well, in less than an hour now. All right. So at this time, if it's all right, I'd like to introduce our second guest on the UEC show today. She is the communications manager for NSLS-II and for the Laboratory for Biomolecular Structure. Her name is Kara Losh. Kara, welcome to the show.
Hi, Matt. Hey, Esther. How are you guys?
Yeah, not too bad. Now, you've been intimately involved with the show since the beginning. I mean, anybody who's watched the credits has seen your name every single episode. So you're quite a bit familiar with how it works. But I think the people that would watch the show might not necessarily be as familiar with you. So I wanted to talk a little bit with you about you, if you don't mind. And there are two things that I know very well about you. And you are very afraid of heights, and you're also a rock climber.
Yes, indeed. Both are true. Are you saying that's a weird thing?
Yeah, a little bit.
Oh, well, so when I'm standing on something like a tall building and looking down, I get freaked out. I don't know why, it's just a thing. But when I'm climbing on a wall, hanging on a rope, it's mostly a mental and a physical exercise for me, because I know I can do that. I can overcome that fear and challenge myself to something that I haven't tried.
No, it's very cool. What's the tallest route that you've ever climbed so far?
So since you know I'm afraid of heights, it's not that tall, but it's about 100 feet. It's down in Pennsylvania, so it's an outdoor route. So it wasn't in a gym or anything. It was real rock outdoor. The area is called Birdsboro. And don't laugh, but the route actually is called Virgin Suicide.
That was unexpected. All right. So that's very cool. When you're not off gallivanting and rock climbing and having all sorts of fun at high places that freak you out once you're at the top of them, you in your day job are the communications manager for NSLS-II and LBMS, and there's recently been a lot of work on revamping the both internal and external websites for the NSLS-II. So I was wondering if you could give us a little bit of a lowdown on the new website design that we have.
Of course. So yeah, no, I do have a day job, even though I like to go climbing. So, and for this, just let's start with the external website. So it was time to revamp that. And what we did is we reached out to users, the user executive committee, but also to staff to figure out, hey, what do you actually need in a website? Because if you redesign a website, you might as well design it in a way that everyone who's using it is more or less happy with it. Sure, there's always something that can be improved. However, the new website really has everything that, based on those surveys, people really need every day is far on top. And we have rearranged the menus so that people can find the things more easily. We have now searchable Beamline database. So if users go to the directory using the search box, all the websites will be searched for those keywords. So there's a lot of good stuff here. From the internal side, we have revamped that as well, because, well, with the COVID situation, it's really hard to communicate. So having a place where you can find everything as a staff member or a partner user is really helpful. So this is what the internal website is for, so that people can really find what they're looking for, get information, and feel empowered to actually have a way to ask questions, to move forward, and to inform themselves.
Cool. And so we all know about the new look of Brookhaven and the logo. And so do you want to, talk about how we get there and, how we should, move forward with how to do with this logo and new look?
Oh yeah, so aside from helping with NSLS-II's websites and communication, I also worked on the branding committee for the Brookhaven branding side. So you have all seen the new look, the new colors, the new logo for Brookhaven Lab. And of course, NSLS-II's new website already follows that new look. That was part of when we made that decision to redo the website, that we really wanted it to already have that new look. So from here, for NSLS-II, of course, we want to look deeper into that. What can we do else to keep the personal identity of the facility alive, even though we have this Brookhaven branding that we of course want to align to because we're part of the lab. But just like CFN, just like LBMS, we are a user facility. So we have special needs that we want to address.
So you also make some of these the science highlights that are released from the NSLS-II, and users are involved. So what actually happens with these science highlights?
Oh yeah. So the science highlights are our communications tool to DOE about really cool science that happens at the facility. So every now and then users get emails from me that are written in a very formal way, like saying, your paper has been picked to become a DOE science highlight. This includes making a slide, and so on and so on. So what I do is I read your paper, I make one PowerPoint slide about the results of your paper, how it's impact society, in as easy words as possible. So this is one of the requirements. And then I'll send it back to the user who's involved to comment and edit it in case I didn't get the science completely right. And once we're all happy with it and has a really nice graphic, it goes up to DOE, who uses that for communication about the science that happens at the different user facilities. So this is really a possibility for users to have their science highlighted to the Department of Energy and even go up through the different staffers to make policy decisions about science.
That sounds great. And so for users who are interested in these highlights, can they find it? And can they find like all the highlights since the beginning of time of all the research, amazing research that's been done here?
Actually, they can. And with the revamping of the new website, we have created a website archive for those science highlights. So there's one page where all the highlights are just sorted by time, but they are also always attached to the different beamlines they have been done at. So if you have a specific beamline you're working on, you're wondering what kind of science highlights have happened at that beamline, you can go to the beamline website, click science highlight, and then you see all of the highlights and a couple of other things that happened at that beamline.
Well, that's really cool. So I've seen, in addition to the DOE science highlights, there's also the newsletter that goes out to the users, the news at NSLS-II. There's a leading light series that's also associated with that, and that is also you, from what I understand. Is it right?
Yes. So I don't write them. We do have a writer for those who is part of the media department, but I have been coming up with the idea to do that. So these leading lights are supposed to tell the story of our users, because we're a user facility. So who's more important than our users? Really, very few people, maybe our funders. But at the end of the day, we're measured up against what our users do cool science at the facility. So we want to tell these stories. But while the science highlights always focus on that one specific paper that just came out, there are way more to talk about a specific user than just that one paper, because you're more than that one paper. And this is what the Leading Light series is all about, to talk a little about, okay, what are your research goals? Where did you come from? How did you get involved in this? And where do you want to go in the future? And we want to kind of give users the opportunity to tell their story in their words. This is why it's in a Q&A style. So we really want to keep your words in that story.
That's really nice. I like it, that we're not just looking at the science itself, but we're also focusing the people behind it and the stories that they have, carrying all these science. Because I believe, we all have our motivation when we do all the science. And so the question is, like, how do you select the users? Like, if we find an amazing user, or do they, just ask you and to be on the interview, or how do you select them?
So since it's a little bit hard for me to know every user, I heavily rely on our Beamline scientists to tell me about their cool users. So if any user would like to be part of the series and thinks, I have a cool story to tell, go reach out to the Beamline scientists and tell them, hey, I've seen those profiles. Is there an option that I could be profiled? And then just tell them who they are. I mean, the Beamline staff should already know you, but basically, they would need to tell me who you are, where you're from, what kind of research you do, and maybe something else that is interesting about you. And then the Beamline staff can reach out to me and tell me that. Or you can also nominate a different user. So if you know some user you want to nominate, do the same thing. Just tell the beamline scientist, here, this person's really cool and should be highlighted.
Yeah, especially if they have some interesting personal anecdotes, like being both afraid of heights and loving to climb rocks. So that'll definitely work out very well. Cara, thank you so much for joining us here on the show today. It was a pleasure to have you. We've been trying to do this for like 2 years now, so I'm glad that we finally got you on. I will see you around the way as in the near future as humanly possible. In the meantime, be well and stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And bye, everyone.
See ya. So at this time, we might as well move things right along and bring out our third guest today. Also, he's a good well, he's a good person, I guess. I would like at this time to mostly. So I would introduce Dan Olds, who is a beamline scientist working at the PDF primarily and XPD beamlines at NSLS-II. Dan, welcome. It's good to have you here, brother.
Hey, Esther. Really nice to see you. Hi, Matt.
I appreciate that, although I probably did deserve it. So now it is true. We are actually friends, and we both do in fact share a love of board games, which is that is a true story. Am I correct?
Yes, we are both big nerds.
Yeah, total nerds. I like Monopoly because you get to learn so much about all the people that you're playing with and how to hate them all on an individual basis within that 6 hours before somebody flips the board inevitably. So what's your favorite game?
I also like finding out the dark sides of my friends and family. I like these really big party games about like deception, like Werewolf and Resistance, where the kind where you really find out like who can lie to me just dead eye straight, and I won't find out till I lose the game because of something they did. We haven't got to play that quite so much during the pandemic since we've all been locked in our basements, and it's just not the same lying to people now.
Yeah. Well, how do you pass the time then, aside from that?
Well, I have 2 little kids, 3 years old and 5 years old, and I've been getting them into games. It's a little different. I sometimes am frightened to find out if they're good at lying at me. But really, the themes of these games have had a lot less to do with like understanding nuances of rules and exploiting them, and a lot more like, but I want the dinosaur to ride on the rocket, so the dinosaur now rides on the rocket. And I go, yeah, that's the game now. That's what's happening. So.
Makes total sense. I'm pretty sure I saw that on an episode of Space Ghost once, at least anyway, so we should be fine.
Indeed.
Aside from the witty banter, which will no doubt continue, one of the main reasons that we wanted to have you on the show is to talk a little bit. One of the really interesting topics that have been coming out, especially over the last year and a half, has been the idea and how to facilitate remote experiments and autonomous experiments. And this is something that you've been very intimately involved with, particularly over the last year and a half. So I wanted to just kind of bring you on, get your perspective on those major topics.
Yeah, well, thanks. So, as a facility, along with everyone else watching and involved, when COVID started, our first priority was really figuring out how do we continue to do business during the pandemic. And at NSLS-II, users are our business, right? We wanted to make sure we could enable users doing science on the beamlines, regardless of everything else happening in the world. What we very quickly realized was that we were initially not ready for remote operations of the scale that suddenly became really critical. So there was a bit of scrambling at first over the last year and a half to get ourselves where we needed to be in terms of upgrading our network and security and improving sample shipping, and really recognizing that additional safety and security considerations had to go into place that you didn't necessarily need to think about when all the users were on site and sitting in front of the beamlines. And so really developing methods for remote operations to occur at these beamlines regardless of where the users were. Now, this hasn't been easy. It's been a lot of hard work, a lot of late nights and collaboration between the different groups at NSLS-II. Particular props to everyone that's been involved in this. And I honestly can't narrow it down to a single group because I think it's something all aspects of the facility, everyone in the facility has been involved in one way or another. But we are really now at a point where we have realized some form of remote experimentation on pretty much every beamline, and we're very, very proud of that. We recognize that not all beamlines are the same, not all experiments are the same. There's some things we just can't do with remote experiments the way we did before when users were able to be on site in the normal typical numbers we were used to. But at the same time, a lot of the upgrades and improvements that we have been putting into place as part of enabling these remote operations has brought about some new modes of operation that we really didn't have in the past. This is things like expanding mail-in options on beamlines, improvements in automation, really accessing all these new forms of sort of high throughput exploration and science, oftentimes through artificial intelligence and machine learning methods. And what we're looking forward to in the future is expanded use of what we call a hybrid mode of access.
So with these hybrid mode operations, combining remote and mail-in and staff on site and some user on site and or even AI, do you think how do you put all these things together and make it more efficient? Do you think that's working in a way?
Yeah. So you've exactly sort of nailed it there, right? Hybrid is all about combining on-site and remote access. So even in a post-COVID world, if we think about where we're going, there's a lot of opportunity space there, right? It allows you to support an experiment with more people than you could possibly do otherwise, certainly now due to site access limits, but even in the future, right? This opens up the door to the number of people that can be involved. Maybe in the past you did the experiment and then you handed the data off to the theorist and you never would have considered bringing the theorist to the beamline. But why not give them the Zoom link and say, hey, if you want to be involved and monitoring the experiment in real time and talking to the beamline staff and the other PIs and the members of the research team, it allows for a much greater collaboration of people, even though some of them would be in person and some of them would be virtually. We see this as really a new and exciting operating mode for NSLS-II. It's going to improve the quality of the science that comes out of the facility, but it also allows us, if you think about it, to expand to maybe more user groups than we would have been able to get to before, specifically some of the underserved user communities, where maybe the burden of travel of coming all the way out to Long Island was just too high to send a large research team. And along that lines, right, if people aren't flying out here, they're not driving out here, we're really reducing the carbon footprint of the facility as a whole.
That's very cool. Now, one of the things that you talked about kind of like tangentially just now is a little bit of this AI, artificial intelligence and machine learning aspect of what it is that you're trying to implement. So what exactly, can you elaborate a little bit on what this is going to be bringing to the user community at NSLS-II? Yeah, so this is a really exciting area where lots of people are working in AI ML right now in all aspects of facility operations. I mean, if you hadn't really heard of this stuff, right, I want to know what rock you're under, and I want to tell Cara because she's going to want to go climb up the side of that rock. So this is areas, right, like we're thinking about things like fault detection in the hardware, alignment, some automatic data quality heuristics, things like efficient data collection. Can we use an AI to gather data a little quicker, processing that data and analyzing it? These are all aspects that many people, both in and outside the facility, are working on. For the users, we want to make your job easier, and your job is doing good science. So we want to make the quality of your data better. We recognize that
key to that is giving you the best possible tools to do the job. You know, you can get a screw into a wall with a hammer, but it's a lot better if we can give you a screwdriver, arguably. We're looking at automating and streamlining a lot of the things that are maybe a little manual right now. And we would really like it to get to the point where you as users may be sitting at the beamline going, wow, this is really going well. And there's some tools you're using that have AI under the hood and you're not even aware of it, right? The focus on all of this, and this is where sort of our approaches may be different from some of the core sort of like AI developments that make the news is, you know, we're focused on getting more science done, more user science done, not the individual AI developments themselves, but what they bring to the greater research community.
I think it's great to outsource, you know, some of these work to the AI. But the leading question would be, you know, with all these automation at the beamline, do you think that the beamline scientists, or are you going to be replaced? You know, if you can look at the camera in our eyes and don't lie about it.
Not anytime soon. For better or worse, right? There still is a lot of effort in this area. We're really more thinking about how you will be working in collaboration with the AI, right? The same way that you would bring students and postdocs to the beamline, maybe you also bring an AI. But the researcher, the human researcher, is still in the loop at all critical points. You know, we envision these new methods, as I said, as just another tool in your research toolbox. We're not interested in replacing the more conventional methods that still work really well. The focus is on developing these new methods to explore things that we weren't able to before, to really enable new forms of inquiry that before were just too large to be handled sort of manually. And, you know, not only is that going to improve science on an individual level, but you'd think some of these automation things, they're going to expand access to the beamlines. And that just through increases in efficiency, we can get more people in and able to take advantage of the precious resource that the beamlines really offer to the scientific community. You know, you can imagine this kind of glorious future of human researchers talking to other ones via Zoom, but they're also sort of allowing the AIs to have first pass analysis. And then they're thinking about how that first pass analysis motivates them to go back and do the conventional analysis. There's a quote, I don't know who it's attributed to, and I'm butchering it, but they said, you know, AI won't replace scientists, but scientists who can leverage AI will replace those scientists who cannot. And we want to make sure our users are in that set of people who can take advantage of it.
Right. Well, it's good to see, because I'm pretty sure this is how Skynet started in the Terminator series. So this is definitely the cutting edge of the future, as it were.
Right.
So unfortunately, we're running pretty tight on time. So at this point, Dan, I'm going to have to let you go. But thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure, for sure, having you on here. And we definitely look forward to seeing you again in the very near future.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
All right. Be well. So at this time, I'm going to introduce our fourth guest, who's coming out here to talk a little bit about more future things here at the NSLS-II. He is the NSLS-II Deputy Director for Construction. At this time, I would like to introduce Eric Johnson. Eric, it's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks very much for inviting me. Hardly ever get to see what's going on anymore. So this is good.
Yeah, absolutely. You're one of the last people that I've wanted to have on here for a really long time. So thank you for being here today.
I'm the last person. What is that telling me, Matt?
Well, it's a scheduling thing. Talk to Gretchen.
Sure.
So what I wanted to just take a moment to touch on this briefly, but now you're a pretty serious choral singer, is that right?
Yep, absolutely. As a matter of fact, my wife and I have been singing since before we got married. So we've been doing it a long time now. I won't tell you how long that actually is. We actually both have, we have a lot of choirs that we sing in, but this one in particular that we sing in is called LSCA, which is the Long Island Symphonic Choral Association, founded by Greg Smith more than 50 years ago. And it's a great choir. They sing a lot of really challenging stuff, but what's really neat about it is that every 3-4 years or something like that, we go on tour. So we like to joke about how, if you really want to see the world, join LSCA. So we've had a great time with that.
Yeah, it's always good to be able to travel the world playing music a little bit, and
Absolutely.
it's been a different era that we've been living through with the pandemic, though, kind of keeping us sequestered where we are in place, as it were. So how is all of this type of activity fared during the pandemic?
Well, I guess I would say really safely, because we did something really cool in the city in January of 20, and then in February of 20, it just all shut down. And basically, people decided that better to be safe than sorry. Although there is some talk, at least amongst one of our choirs, that they're going to try and get back together this fall. But it's sort of interesting. You know, is everybody going to be vaccinated? Are you happy to try and rehearse 6 feet apart from everybody? Are you going to be wearing it's called a singer's mask. These things look more like a bucket than they do a mask, but they have these very large volume masks so you can actually breathe through them. But you know, we'd love to do it, so I'm willing to give it a try. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, it'll definitely be good to get back into it for sure.
Yeah.
So outside of singing, your day job is as the deputy director for construction at the NSLS-II. And can you tell us a little bit about that?
Isn't that a weird title? I mean, deputy director for construction. How much construction do you see going on? I get all of these things, you know, where people are asking me to go and try and do somebody's conventional construction job. It's great on LinkedIn, right? It's a good title for that, but it's nothing like what I actually wind up doing. It's hard to describe to people, and so the simplest way to think about it is that we try and listen to people and understand kind of what their ideas are and what their dreams are about what the instruments are they'd like to build, help them to try and understand their dreams a little bit better. And if it looks like it could be a project, then we try and help them out to turn that into a project so they can actually realize those dreams. So in that sense, it's kind of cool, but it's a weird title for what it is.
So you talk about like projects and dreams, and so how do you select these projects or dreams?
So most of the time, the ideas for these beamlines come to us in things like strategic workshops. And so, for example, it was the strategic workshop that was hosted in 2015, and that ultimately led to the NSLS-II project that we're working on now. And this open platform liquid scattering instrument that Ben Acco built with others. And then there's another one which is for a near infrared beamline that is we're trying to launch right now. Those things kind of come out of those sorts of settings. You know, other projects that we get, it's kind of one-offs, right? The PI comes up with some really great idea, and the way that winds up happening then is that, you know, various advisory groups look at it, like the SAC and the UEC, and they get back to us. And so that was the way in which this LBMS, this cryo-EM project came to us. That project was led by Sean McSweeney, and we delivered that for New York State. So it's not our usual kind of project, and it isn't our usual kind of sponsor, but it was still pretty successful, I think.
So what other beamline projects are there that are in play right now as we speak?
Well, I would imagine that your favorite is going to be Andy Broadbent's hex beamline, right? It was nice to have high energy X-rays, right? I guess there's some people who like those sorts of things. And again, that one was sponsored by NYSERDA. So that's another New York sponsored thing. New York's actually supporting us pretty well, I would say. And with any kind of luck, that should get finished off by the end of 2022. There's another one which is a little newer, and I mentioned before, is NSLS-II. That's a project where Paul Jacques is the project director and Julian Adams is the project manager. We just week before last finished the DOE CD2-3 review, and that went very well. So if that all hangs together, then we should have this coherent diffractive imaging beamline, which might be ready as early as 2025. And then there's the RA and SXN beamlines, which are on one straight, but they're independent. And those should be available in 2027 or thereabouts.
So how many projects or how many dreams are you working on? And like, how long do they usually take? Or you have like long-term plans, short-term plans, or different kind of projects?
It kind of depends a little bit, right? From your perspective, right? Some people will say they take forever. And as you finish them, you go, where the hell did all that time go? I just, you know, don't really get it. Sort of in the near term, we're working on this near infrared beamline, the INF one. We're trying to sort of nestle that in with the Co-Design Center for Quantum Advantage. It's also a New York State funded thing, and it's basically how these things can support each other in making probes for quantum information materials. There are some other proposals that have been put together, but we don't really have formal encouragement from their sponsors at the moment. That never stops us from thinking about them, mind you. We're trying to put them together, but we have a longer term one, right? NSLS-II is just getting off the ground, and we're already thinking about NSLS-III. And that would be another DOE major item of equipment proposal, but we're kind of trying to talk to them about going at it in a little bit different way. I mean, if you walk around the floor, it's only half full right now, and we'd like to fill it up. And so even with these ones that we're adding on, there's slots for another 20-ish or so. So this proposal would have about 19 beam lines that you would build as a proposal, but we would do it over a span of like 12 years, and you do it in little flights, a little bit like the BDN was done, where there's a couple of beam lines delivered each year. And so that one is coming along. And then of course, by 2030, believe it or not, NSLS-II will be 15 years old, right? I like to think it's brand new. So back to your question, you know, projects take a long time, and sometimes you look at the back end of it and you go, how did that all happen so fast? So, you know, there's quite a range. Sometimes I think sort of on the fast side, we might get something done in maybe 3 years for an instrument project, not too big. But 10 years, that's not crazy. It can be that long. So you have to kind of think ahead.
Now, the cost for these projects then has to vary quite a bit too, based on their scope and what is an example of a low end versus a high end cost for something like this, like building an experiment versus building a beam line?
Experiments, you know, with completely new instruments, you know, at the very, very low end, it might be $1 million or $2 million for, you know, a decent instrument. I don't want to say that the sky's the limit on beamline costs, but it's pretty close. It's getting bigger. For an insertion device beamline these days, it's not hard to spend $20 million. And so it's these smaller ones that you can pull off a little faster. The bigger ones can have quite a run up just to getting permission to spending the money. So it can be a long time.
So for these projects that takes, you know, a couple of years or up, you know, or 10, 12 years you mentioned, like how do you make sure that it's still, you know, relevant by the time it's done?
I mean, that is a worry in the sense that, you know, if you had to start something that's 10 years down the line before you deliver it or even longer, the landscape may have changed underneath you. And so that's why continuous feedback is really important in these things. Even after we have a project that we're starting and we're working on, there's lots of feedback with the users and with the SAC and the UEC, just to try and make sure that it's still going in a direction that is important to the science. And so that feedback all the way through is pretty important. So for example, on this NSLS-II, you know, we're pretty much launched. NSLS-III, we're going and we have an idea what that should look like, but this fall, there's already going to be some more workshops to look at what the science could be like. So you kind of want to do these adjustments and corrections where you can, maybe even every couple of years, just to make sure it's still doing something that's going to be relevant and interesting.
It's very cool. I'm so glad that you were able to join us today. I know that look for a minute there like it might not be possible, so I'm definitely glad it worked out.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Absolutely. It's really great to hear about all these exciting things that are coming down the pipe at NSLS-II. And of course, to hear your perspective on it is really important. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today. And again, I hope that you are well and you stay safe, and that when all of the choral activities start to come back up again, they come back up in a very positive manner.
You bet. Thanks very much for having me. Take care.
All right, you too. Thank you. All right, so at this time, I would like to bring out our final guest for the day. He is our returning champ. He is our ratings draw, the NSLS-II director, world heavyweight champion, and my best friend, John Hill. John, welcome.
Thank you, Matt. These get better and better. Good to see you again.
I try. So is there anything left right now that I actually don't know about you personally?
I think you know an uncomfortable amount about me at this point, Matt, so I'm going to say no. You can restrict your questions to soccer, yoga, and NSLS-II.
Okay, so have you given thoughts to starting a competitive yoga team at NSLS-II? I'm going to guess that's a no. So it looks like John is frozen at the moment. So I will say that, yes, we're going to have a competitive yoga team.
He didn't say no.
One way or another. I think that's clearance. I'm hoping this will resolve itself momentarily as quickly as possible. In the meantime, I do want to remind everybody here in the audience watching right now that if you have a question, you can submit it through the Q&A function. If we don't get a chance to answer it during the show, we will do our best to make sure that it is answered for you afterwards. And again, if you have any questions at any time involving being a user of the NSLS-II or how anything at the facility is working or is planned to be working in the future, you can always send an email to nsls2uec@bnl.gov, and we will do our best to get an answer to you as quickly as possible. And John has returned. So, John, you may not know this, but you just approved a competitive yoga team for the NSLS-II that we're going to look at starting up in the very near future.
I can't wait. And you'll be part of that team, Matt?
Absolutely. I'm going to work on my flexibility, and we're going to see where we can go from there. But aside from this new competitive yoga team, maybe you can give us a little bit of a lowdown about what's been going on at NSLS-II and what's coming up in the near future.
Sure, happy to. Thanks, Matt. I wanted to start actually this week. Often I start with safety, as important as that is, and one of our real core values. Cybersecurity is just as important, and we're beginning to really focus on that. I wanted to say a few words about that to kick off. Starting with our motivation for why we need to care so much about cybersecurity. I'm sure you, like everyone else, are watching the news and hearing about daily attacks on various infrastructure across the country, cyber attacks, and we can't leave NSLS-II vulnerable to that. We need to continue to operate the facility. We can't leave it wide open. So these attacks are getting more aggressive and more organized by the day, and we need to protect ourselves against that. So number one, to protect the facility. Number two, it's our users' data, of course. There's data they collect is very valuable to them. They spent large amounts of time and money to collect it, and we need to make sure that we keep that safe for them. That applies to general users for sure, but also proprietary users are particularly sensitive about their data. They essentially contract with us to collect that data, and so we need to pay close attention to that. So for all these reasons, we really need to focus on cybersecurity, make sure our systems are robust and secure. And so we've been focusing on that now for a while, trying to develop it to be second nature, like safety is the core value for us. Cybersecurity needs to be that way too. So some of the things that we've been doing have been re-IPing all the beam lines, for example, moving them onto a fast, secure network. That's now complete, by the way. All beam lines are now on the NS2N network. We're also putting two-factor authentication on those beamline computers for users to log in. They'll need to use a form of two-factor authentication. The common one is Duo that Brookhaven administers through BNL.gov. Any BNL.gov account comes with that. And this is our first step towards kind of a zero trust posture and keeping those systems secure. And I'll mention here in the context that one of the most common ways for cyber attacks to go through is through compromising credentials, compromising passwords. So 80% of all data breaches go that way. And 54% of people use less than 5 passwords in their lives. So they make themselves quite vulnerable to that. And so there's a message to everyone, not just through computers at BNL, but just in general in your life. Make sure your passwords are secure, up to date, and different. So you can't compromise one account and then get into all the others. So we have these BNL.gov accounts now. They're automatically assigned on all the beamlines. So that's a much easier process for the users now. And as I said, they'll do two-factor authentication. We're also moving all our systems onto a new version of Linux, Red Hat version 8. That is a significantly more secure, updated system. It's the lab standard at Brookhaven and can be patched and kept up to date at all times. So that's underway right now. Essentially, all the beamline computers and IOCs are now done. There's a few stragglers on the structural biology program beamlines that we're taking care of and working through some exceptions there. Also doing that on the accelerator systems. 2/3 of those systems are done as we go into this current shutdown, and about 1/3 left to do. Some will work through in the maintenance periods in the coming cycle. Some will have to get done in the December shutdown. I want to mention in this context, we've committed to the DOE as part of our condition for operation that we will have all this work done by the end of the calendar year. And so that's the real deadline for all this to happen and get us into this much more secure posture. And then from then on, we can maintain that going forward. So that's the cybersecurity. As I mentioned, we've just started a shutdown last week. This is going to be about 3 weeks. We come back up early September. On the accelerator side, there's about 150 different tasks Timo was telling me that has to happen during the shutdown. The major ones there, the instrumentation front end, which need to be installed. The hex front end is going to go in, and the straight section for the hex beamline will also be going in this cycle, this shutdown. So those are the big ticket items. We're also going to warm up and pump and purge the cryo plant again to remove some impurities from it. And then, as I said, there's 100 odd other tasks going on during the shutdown. So very busy on the accelerator side. On the beamline side, obviously no users right now, but that doesn't mean work has stopped, and a large number of maintenance activities are going on the different beamlines. Software updates, that kind of thing, to make sure we're ready for when the user program starts back up in the fall. So mentioning the user program, I thought it'd be useful to go through some stats for you to kind of reflect the state of the user program now and what's happened as well to the COVID pandemic. If I look back pre-COVID days, one of the metrics we look at is our oversubscription rate, and the beamlines are about a factor of 2 oversubscribed in terms of the number of proposals that got ran, that were able to run, and about 2.5 times oversubscribed in terms of the number of shifts that ran. So people were requesting more shifts than they got, and the more proposals came in, and then we were able to satisfy. During the pandemic, those numbers 2.5 shot up to about 3 times oversubscribed in terms of number of proposals, and 5 in terms of the number of shifts being allocated. So we were essentially unable to support as many proposals, no surprise, and those that did got less time than they had wanted by a factor of 5. That was during the depths of the pandemic. That has recovered somewhat now. We've been able to bring those down. In the last 2 cycles, we've been around 2 times oversubscribed in terms of number of proposals, and 3 times oversubscribed in terms of number of shifts. So what this means is about the same ratio of proposals getting allocated now as were pre-pandemic, but those that do get allocated get less time than they had expected. And that's us trying to get as many proposals in as we can. In terms of the number of users, we're projecting about 900 unique users this year. So that'd be half what we would have gotten in pre-pandemic days. And so that's again a consequence of the ongoing situation. Of those 900 users, I think about 2/3 will be only remote. They only ever use us remotely. They didn't come once throughout the year. And about 1/3 will have some on-site presence. And just as a number, we had about 230 people on site last cycle, on-site users. So the number of unique users is down, but the number of user visits, the number of people who actually come is about 4,000. It's about the same as it was before the pandemic. And so again, what you're seeing is that people are able to come, but the fewer different people are coming. It's the same people coming back more often. So that number 4,000 tells you that on average about each unique user comes 4 times to the facility a year. And that ratio is about 3 pre-pandemic. So again, the people who are coming a little bit more often than they were before the pandemic. I think what this really reflects is the travel restrictions that are happening right now. People are either unable or reluctant to travel, and we obviously have restrictions on the number of people who can come on site any one time. And so those 2 factors are limiting things, and those who can come tend to come a bit more often. And those tend to be local users for obvious reasons. So that's kind of a fact of life right now, but it's something we need to pay attention to, because long term that would start to have negative impacts on the facility. If we're not getting new users in, that's a problem. We need those new users in. We can't just have the same people using it time and time again. And so going forward is something we need to pay attention to make sure that we keep those numbers up. So that's kind of what I wanted to mention as kind of an outset, but I do want to take a moment here to thank the staff for their work in keeping the user program going during this amazing, difficult times, particularly the beamline scientists who are kind of on the forefront of the coalface, so to speak, of supporting the users. There's so much extra work for them when they support a remote user compared to an on-site user. Obviously, they have to do the work that the user might otherwise have done themselves, but there's additional work in terms of the data infrastructure and the remote handling kind of capabilities that need to set up and maintain. So it's a lot more work for them to support the remote user program. And they're really doing a superb service to the user community to get the number of people through that we are seeing coming through. I was really happy that Paul thanked them all for that and took note of that at the opening of his remarks. So thank you, Paul, for recognizing them in that. It's a real testament to their dedication to the user program and the user facility that we're able to do that. So I want to thank them all for that. And those are my opening remarks, Matt. Back to you.
Esther?
So you mentioned about the same user coming on site instead of getting new users. Do you think that's going to change in the fall about the on-site user program? Maybe more user can come in, or?
So what we're doing for planning purposes right now for the on-site user program is the same numbers we used for the summer, which was each beamline is allowed to have 10 unique users during the course of the cycle, 10 on-site users. That is up to them how they spread those. They might put them all in one. If it was one very complicated experiment, maybe you have 3 or 4 people for that experiment, or you might have 10 single people spread out, depending on what type of experiment it is and what the beamline needs are. In addition, each of what we call our beamline programs, this is an organizational structure we have at NSLS-II that contains typically 5 or 6 beamlines. Each program has another 20 slots they can allocate depending on what the beamline needs are. Because again, each beamline is different in terms of that on-site needs. So on average, that might be a sort of 10 to 15 users per beamline, depending on how they allocate those extra slots. But I'll say that this is conditional on the COVID situation, and we're watching that very closely right now. Obviously, the rates are going up in quite scary ways, and we're really trying to mitigate the risk to the staff by having these people come on site. We're back on site now to having to wear masks, having a social distance, whether you're vaccinated or not. Those rules apply now. And again, that reflects the nature of this disease right now. It's very active, very prevalent in the local community, and we're trying to, again, protect our staff and our users, keep that risk down as low as possible. So while those are the numbers right now, the 10 plus 20 model that we've been using, we may have to adjust that down if these rates don't come down soon.
Right. Now, even with all of this going on right now, I understand you had a very, very important high-profile visitor last week. You want to tell us a little bit about who that was and how that went?
We had the Secretary of Energy here, Secretary Granholm. She came through. She spent about 2 hours at the lab. It was a virtual visit, visiting different parts of the lab, but she spent 10 minutes with NSLS-II in particular. It was a really good visit. We took her to the SIX beamline, showed her the end station, walked up and down the piping so she could really kind of get a sense of the scale of that end station. For those of you who don't know, this is one of our biggest spectrometers, about 15 meters in radius. So she really got a sense of the scale and the uniqueness of the instruments that we offer the users here, but also the quality of the expertise we have to allow them to deliver the science that they need to when they come here. I think she really got a sense of that, the fact that we're a new facility, that we're user-oriented. She asked lots of great questions. She was very enthusiastic. It's a real pleasure to have her here. Hopefully one day we can get it back in person, but it was a fun visit, and we showed ourselves in a good light. I was very happy with it.
Very cool.
That's cool. And since we're talking about DOE and politics, do we have any news on the budget for next year?
Budget is always a good question. We have no hard news in the sense that we don't have a budget. The general belief out there is that there won't be a budget passed. Budget should be passed by October 1st, of course, the start of the fiscal year. That most likely will be in a continuing resolution for a while once the new fiscal year starts. Continuing resolution typically just sticks us at the same funding levels as last year. So we could survive that relatively fine. The House budget and the Senate budget both exist and are both published and public. There are small increases for the synchrotrons in those budgets, a few percent, let's say 2%. And I think that that's the most likely outcome, is that the final budget will land somewhere around there. We'll never know until it happens. But if that's the outcome, then we can live with that also. That's a budget similar to what we got here with a little bit of increase.
Very cool. So we've gotten a couple of questions that have filtered in too that we haven't quite touched on yet, and this one would be kind of in between you and Eric. So, but I was just wondering if you could give us a little bit of a brief update on what the current status of the HEX beamline is.
If Eric's still in line, he can give you a detailed answer to that. It looks like he is. So Eric, why don't you jump in?
Sure, it's pretty easy. They're making great progress on it right now. All the hutches are up. The building, it's got a big end station building that's completed. And they have vendor contracts, and they've started doing factory acceptance tests for the vendor contracts. So the next few months going into early next year is going to be characterized by a lot of installation. And so, sometime the middle of next year, they'll begin to start making light, and hopefully the project will be finished off by the end of next year.
Awesome. That's really great to hear. Thank you so much. And at this time, we are just about out of time. We have hit our hour. So, John, thank you so much for joining us again today and for
Thank you, Matt.
update on things at the NSLS-II. And I'm really, really looking forward to this competitive yoga team. So I really appreciate your clearance for that.
Me too.
As soon as possible. But to everybody who has attended the meeting or the show today, I would like to thank all of you for being here. And I just want to remind you that the Users Executive Committee for the NSLS-II, we are elected to represent you, the user community. So please send any of the questions or concerns that you might have at any time to that email address again, NSLS2UEC@bnl.gov. And please also remember to send in any questions you might have for the Ask Me Anything segment on the video newsletter. And that will about do it for what we've got here for you today.
And one last thing, the proposal deadline is going to be September 30. That's in 45 days. So if you have new proposal or you're requesting being time for existing proposal, don't forget about that.
That's right. And we'll be back again with another UEC show right around Thanksgiving time, and keep an eye out in the meantime for Off the Couch in between. So thank you everyone at NSLS-II for keeping the lights on during this, which still continues to be a difficult time.
Yeah, thank you all for tuning in.
And an extra special thanks to Tim, Gretchen, Cara, who did double duty today, Jorge for making all of this possible, and thank you, Esther, for joining us today as the co-host.
Yeah, and thank you, Matt, for being an amazing host and organizer.
Thank you very much. It was great having you. Everyone, please stay safe and be well, and always remember that metal is forever.